Welcome to another episode of the Fortitude Forum, and I am pleased to welcome in Dr. Bobby Lowe. He is a human performance psychologist. He's the director of mental performance at Brigham Young University, and he is also the author of the upcoming book, Wiring Intelligence. Dr. Lowe, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bill. This will be fun.
Yeah, this will be very exciting and I think very impactful for the listeners because you are in the trenches. You're in the trenches with executives and, of course, athletes at BYU. So I'm excited to tap in a little bit to your brain and your knowledge and what you can pass along to the listeners. But before we dig into that, I really wanted to ask you about your athletic background because we have so many athletes on this show, and I, of course, have that background as well. But talk to me about your athletic career and what that experience was like for you, and maybe to a degree how that ultimately led you to where you are now.
Yeah, no, it's a great story, and I'm happy to share it here. And really, they're intertwined, right? So, like, I was an athlete, and then my experience pushed me into the human performance psychology world, right? The sport performance psychology world. And so, you have to rewind a little bit, going back to my college athletic days, probably 20 years now. And I was a track and field athlete. I was a pole vaulter. I actually came here to BYU. I walked onto the team over here, and in my first couple of years, I was training. I was doing all the physical stuff. I was in the weight room. I was on the track. I was eating all the right nutrition. I was just doing everything I could possibly do to optimize my performance and to enhance it. But I would still get out in competitions and I would struggle. In the pole vaulting world, there's a term called no hiding, which is worse than getting last place. Like you actually don't even get a mark. And so in my freshman year, I would go out to these competitions and I'd feel ready, but then I'd make three attempts and I'd miss all three attempts and I would no hide. And so I would get worse than last place. And this just created a pattern over and over again. And my coach finally pulled me aside and he's, look, Bobby, like we need you to perform. If you're not going to get out there and make bars, like we can't take you to these meets. We've got to go a different direction. That was a little bit of an awakening. And I was a competitive athlete. Nobody wants to know height, right? Like I wanted to go and jump and compete and improve and get better, right? And I had grown up watching, probably like you, the great athletes, Michael Jordan. Unfortunately, I'm a Utah kid, so it still burns a little bit deep that the Bulls beat us twice in the NBA championship, right?
That's right.
And so but I watched Michael, I watched Tiger, I watched all these great athletes, and I could tell that they did something different. I could tell that they used their mind in a different way, and I wanted to know what that was. And so I was lucky enough here at BYU. We had a women's tennis coach. His name is Dr. Craig Manning. And at the time, he was coaching women's tennis. So I went over and I started to talk to him because I knew he was a human performance psychologist and that he coached the mental side of the game. And so I basically knocked on his door and I said, hey, teach me everything. One, I was really curious just to learn about it for myself. But then two, I have this ultimatum on the table. My coach tells me I got to get better. And so I started to study it, started to apply it, and had a transformational experience. I went from being struggling, kind of mid level, to becoming an NCAA All American, becoming one of the top jumpers in the US. Went on to have a 3 year professional career and even got a chance to chase the Olympics in 2012. My career was derailed by a foot injury that then sent me on a different path. But those were both achievements and experiences that, quite honestly, I just dreamed of as a kid. I only dreamed of. I never really thought, oh, am I going to have that kind of shot? But as I reflect back on it, it really was the mental side that helped unlock all of my physical abilities and all of my physical skills. And then my performance followed, right? But an awesome personal experience, but I really fell in love with the mental side of the game through that. And then I went on to pursue my own career. I went on to go to University of Missouri and get a PhD in psychology and study with Dr. Rick McGuire, who's a legendary track and field coach and sports psychologist in the field. And then for the last maybe 15 years, been just training and teaching and coaching executives, coaching athletes. Obviously, day to day, I'm here at BYU and do a lot of work with the players here. But yeah, it was really that experience that kind of sent me on this journey.
When you knocked on the tennis coach's door and you began to spend a little time with him, can you remember the first thing that he taught you that really had an impact that maybe has still stuck with you to this day? There had to be so much, but some of it gets lost and some of it really stands out. What was that first lesson that you took in and absorbed?
Yeah, I'll give you the whole story because I do remember it pretty vividly. It was I had a bad competition, right? And then I was coming into that next week training, and I went in, I chatted with him, and in a lot of ways, he and I are very similar. We actually work together day to day now. He's my colleague and peer here at BYU, and so we kind of share responsibilities here at BYU. But when I first met with him, I basically explained, here's what happens in competition. I get out there, I feel like I'm ready to go, but my nerves and anxiety start to run away. I start to think about the outcomes. I start to think about, what if I no height? What if I make mistakes? Or what if I can't make a bar? My coach is going to cut me from the team. And so my mind would just start to race on all of these external factors, right? And I know how to describe that now. At the time, I was like, I just feel like I'm scatterbrained out there. I feel like my brain is running all over the place. And so I'm articulating this to him. And so sure enough, he says, okay, here's the first thing we're gonna teach you. And in the psychology world, it's called task orientation. But it's basically a skill where you get to direct your attention, direct your focus onto specific tasks that help you execute and perform pole vaulting well. And so we walked through it, and he asked me, hey, what are the top three skills that if you do, you're going to jump high? So I quickly rattled them off like I knew them, right? I was like, okay, if I'm gripping the pole tight and I'm good connected to the pole, that'll help me jump high. If I have a great plant and I'm able to roll the pole really well, like that's the second thing. And then the third thing is, once I'm upside down, if I just really pull on this pole, it will launch me like a rocket into the air, right? And so as I described that, he's like, great. Let's focus on those things. I want you to identify them. I want you to write down these three task oriented focus cues. You're going to go out and practice, and I just want you thinking about that. Every time you take a jump, just think about those two things. I don't care if it's a good jump, a bad jump, just think about those three things. And I remember going out and actually having one of the best training sessions I've ever had. And then I came back to him, and it was fun. It was like one of those, you're a kid and your parents tell you to do something, you come back and you're excited, you're like, holy smokes, it worked. What you said worked. And anyway, so that was that experience I had that first time learning that skill of task orientation. And yeah, and I still remember it pretty vividly today. And at that point, I was like, okay, give me the fire hose. Like, I want everything.
Yeah. It's funny how that works. So that was in training, but was there an initial experience that you had actually in competition in utilizing some of those trainings where you said, "Oh my goodness, this doesn't just work in practice. This mental toughness or fortitude or mental training thing actually works in competition, and I can't believe that this is actually a huge advantage over my competitors."
Yeah. And really from that day, we started doing a lot of training. And so there, I actually can articulate a lot of different skills that sort of immersed in competitions. And every competition is a little bit different, and so you had to rely on different mental skills. One thing that was fun and I got pretty good at was just having the routine and the process for every competition, right? But and I write about a lot of these stories in the book that I'm about to publish here. But one of them that comes to mind, I'll tell you, actually was my very first U.S. championship. So I had just graduated college. I had just finished. Had a great career. NCAA All American. I was the highest jumping senior in the class, third best jumper in the college rankings. So I'm like off to the professional career, right? In 2010, I was jumping in my first U.S. championship in indoor in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I get there. And I had known who some of these competitors were because I'd watched them, I'd seen them. I jumped against a couple of them in different competitions here and there up to that point in my career. But I got to this event, and it was fun because out walks a guy named Nick Heisong, who won the Olympic gold medal in 2004, or sorry, in 2000. And then out walks Tim Mack, who won the Olympic gold medal in 2004. Out walks Derek Miles, who won I think the bronze in 2008. I'm standing there mixing it up with the best that have ever done this, right? And we start to warm up, we start to get ready, and I get on the runway, and I'm usually we warm up, we get our speed, and then we go and take 2 or 3 practice jumps just to make sure everything's dialed in. Similar to you, probably warming up your arm back in the quarterback days, right? And anyway, so I'm blazing down the runway, and I plant this pole, and I'm going into the pit. And as I'm supposed to go up into the air and be slingshotted into the air and go over the bar and land into the pit, I realize I'm not going into the pit anymore. I'm actually being rocketed back out over the runway. And so now I'm really quick. Now I'm 18 feet in the air, but I'm looking down and I see concrete and the runway, and like I'm going, oh no, this is a disaster. I'm going to crash, and this is gonna hurt. Now, as pole vaulters, like these happen. They're not really common, but they happen. So you do learn how to crash. But I remember falling to the ground, and I'm like, okay, just get your feet underneath you. You can like land, tuck and roll, and you'll be fine, right? And I hit the ground. My spikes stuck into the carpet that's on the ground, right? And I just like just timber like a tree and slammed into the concrete. And the whole stadium, 5,000 fans in the stadium, everybody just gasped. They're like, "Oh no, this guy just died." And so I sit there for a minute. Trainers are running out, people are running out. Everybody thought I'd really hurt myself, and I'm assessing, okay, no broken bones. That really hurt, but I'm okay. So I got up, and everybody cheered, and I'm walking over. Not the best moment to get big cheers from everybody, but that was okay. And I walk over to my coach, and we start to assess what happened. And I remembered as I talked to my coach and I'm walking back to jump again, I remembered I had this sneaky little thought in my brain that basically just said, "Don't embarrass yourself. Don't embarrass yourself." Right before I went to take that jump. And obviously at this point I had trained enough to know, oh man, that's like the worst thing you can think right before you take a jump. And so I had to apply the skills of refocusing, right? And I used a lot of my own, we call them performance statements, but to reassess, get my confidence back up, get my focus dialed in, and then get back on the runway and do it again. And to close out the story, I did have a couple of successful jumps. I ended up making a couple of bars and finished 10th in the competition. It was a great experience for me, good experience for me, but definitely like nobody wants to crash on the biggest stage in the biggest competition. But it was that was the mental skill that came out is I let a distracting, interfering thought enter my brain, which then directly impacted my performance, and I had to correct that. So that yeah, that's I have I don't know probably a dozen, maybe 2 dozen stories
I bet.
similar where I've had to just apply. This is where you apply the skill of confidence. This is where you apply the skill of focus. This is where you had to manage your energy and your emotions and your anxiety.
The picture that is starting to emerge for me is how many thousands and thousands of athletes that are out there that are not performing at their best because they're just not aware of the things that they can do with their mind to directly affect their physical performance. So I think on one hand, it's very exciting. On the other hand, you and I have a lot of work to do in finding those people, getting to them. But you mentioned performance statements. I'd love to hear just one or two that are most important that somebody can apply within seconds right before maybe they go into practice or a competition to prevent themselves from thinking those negative thoughts, because those are so hard to fight against for all of us, even people that are a little more self aware than others. So, what are a couple of statements that are easy and memorable?
Yeah, easy to share kind of the ones that I used as a pole vaulter, and most of them were built around, hey, I'm a great jumper. I'm a very talented athlete, and just understanding who am I as my own identity and as a person, as a jumper, as an athlete, right? But really having some clear language around, hey, I'm a great jumper. I'm great at, and then identify your specific strengths or the things that make you great, right? Like I wasn't the tallest guy out there, I wasn't the strongest guy out there, but I was fast on the runway. And so I would say, hey, I'm really fast on the runway. And that means I can get onto these poles that will launch me 18, 19 feet in the air. And I just had to keep saying that. And then other things like, hey, I belong. I shared that story of getting distracted by these other Olympians, right? But you have to remind yourself of, no, I belong here too. I've jumped these heights and I've competed against these guys before and I belong here as well. And so those are just a couple of quick performance statements, really strong I am statements and really strong I can statements, which kind of enhance the confidence and enhance the self belief that you have. But backing up a little bit here, Bill, we've got to understand a little bit of the neuroscience that happens in the brain. I'll just share a few thoughts here in maybe 2 or 3 minutes. But you were a quarterback, and I played football in high school and in junior high, and track and field was my sport that had the higher ceiling, so I chased that. But we get out there on the track and we get out there on the field, and we just do rep after rep of it's skill work or running plays or running sets or drills. But the whole reason we're doing that is to build muscle memory, right? To just wire in and program in the habits so that when you get into competition, the pressure's high, the moment like you have to think fast, you just think automatically, right? So we build those habits. The same thing happens to us in the mind with, call it, our mental habits, right? With those thinking patterns that we develop. And so what what I train a lot of the athletes on, and this is where this ties into performance statements, is you actually have to get to a place where you're building I'll call them correct thinking patterns, but it's not really a matter of like wrong or right or correct or incorrect. It's really just, hey, there's certain thinking patterns that unlock the neuroscience in your brain, right? Like you think faster, you think clearer, you make better decisions, spatial awareness gets unlocked, memory gets unlocked, right? So there's certain type of thinking. In my book, I write about that type of thinking and I call it proactive intelligence, which really is it's the ability to create and control your thoughts to then create and make something happen, right? And then the intelligence part is the ability to acquire and apply skills. And so you're controlling your abilities and your skills, right? That's proactive intelligence. But there's a whole series of thinking patterns that unlocks that, right? If we're not disciplined in creating those thinking patterns and controlling them, inadvertently, like we'll have other patterns show up. We'll have other patterns get created and they'll turn into habits in the mind. I call that reactive intelligence. And so here's a good example, and we'll use football as maybe an example. You're a quarterback. I'm sure you threw dozens and dozens of touchdowns in your day, but I'm also sure you threw a couple of picks, a couple of interceptions, right?
Quite a few.
And maybe more than we wanted to. And I can imagine that every time you throw a pick, there was a certain response, maybe a reactive response, some language that goes through your mind, some frustrations and some anger. Your emotions start to get fired up. Maybe you get a little bit angry. But we see this happen in sport all the time where a player will react to an event in what I'll call a reactive way, but it's actually a very harmful way in terms of thinking the right ways and then unlocking all that performance. And you watch some of the greats out there. We throw Tom Brady's name out there and currently Patrick Mahomes, right? But they usually don't flinch very much in a moment like that. They'll make a mistake or they'll throw a pick and really like they're coming off the field and they're like, no sweat, we got this. Next play, go get the ball back, we'll be good. And then you see those moments show up. I was actually just doing some research on, I forget exactly what year it was, but the year that the Patriots were playing the Seahawks and some of those final plays that led to it. You could also bring up, man, the Patriots when they were playing was it the Falcons, the year that
Yes.
they had to come back from like 28 points down or whatever the number was. But there's a certain type of thinking pattern that helps unlock all that performance. And so tying that back into performance statements, because that was what the original question was, really really what performance statements are a set of written out intentional phrases that we use as players to organize the mind to then unlock that performance. So it's not really just one statement or two statements. It's, here are my performance statements. Here's what I'm saying to myself when it's 3rd and 2 and we have to get a first down, right? Or here's what I'm saying to myself when we're under 2 minutes and we have to go and score to win the game, right? And so those can be different sets of thinking patterns. But what we're trying to avoid is some of those reactive thinking patterns, like, oh no, 2 minutes left. We're down six. We can't score on these guys. That defense really good. It's really good, right? Like I just threw two picks earlier. I'm cold, I'm off. This is not going to be very good. We can't, like, all of that is reactive intelligence. Those are thinking patterns that get developed if we're not intentional or disciplined in our thinking. But going into a 2 minute drill thinking like that, we're not gonna play well. We're not gonna perform well. So we've got to create the correct or proactive thinking patterns.
So, as a quick and easy way to remember this, or at least get started, statements that start with I can and I am, and stay away from statements or questions that start with the words what if? Because I
Yeah,
heard you
what
talk
if?
about that earlier in your career. Because what if usually is followed by some sort of negative thought, right?
Yeah, our brain has a piece in there that's designed to protect us, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to forecast out into the future and it's going to look for, man, what if I throw a pick? Or what if we lose this game? Or what if I embarrass myself? That was the one thing that I said to myself. It's going to look for those types of threats and then it's going to want to protect itself from that, right? And if we're not disciplined, those will take over. Like those will hijack our mind, it'll hijack our emotions and try to protect us, right? And so we got to be really disciplined at building the right patterns and the right habits so that we can, it's not really blocking it out, but it is like blocking it out, right?
Yeah. Well, so let's jump into the book. You touched on it a little bit in these different intelligences and the 8 mindsets. So the book is called Wiring Intelligence. And tell us real quick, when is the book out for public?
Yeah, I don't have an exact date right now, but I'm hustling. Like we're looking at a fall release here,
Okay.
pretty close.
And this is being recorded August 25, so we don't have that much longer to wait. So, yeah, walk me through the 8 mindsets, if you would, just briefly, a brief description about each of them. I would love to hear anytime you can condense down into a number of steps or a mindset, you put a number on it. It's interesting, and I think it attracts the mind to what those 8 things actually are.
No, happy to. And I shared a little bit about kind of the beginning of the book here, but we really dig into, okay, what is high performance? What does that look like? The Tiger Woods, the Serena Williams, the Michael Phelps type athletes, like how do they think? What does that look like? And then I back everything up with here's the research and here's the neuroscience. So maybe you want to skip over that part if you're not as nerdy as I am. Here's the science that sort of backs all of that up. And then through my own research, my own experience, I've coached thousands of athletes, right? So I've got a chance to watch a lot of these principles and a lot of these mindsets in action. We've literally seen kids win national championships with these. We've put people on the podium at the Olympic Games. We've like the research and the science has helped win NBA championships. So you start to stack up and bring in all the evidence, and then we've organized it in a way to then to share with people, right? So the 8 mindsets. And actually, before I dive into that, let me just re-emphasize we are always programming habits in our brain through our thinking, through the words that we use, right? The thoughts that we have, the words that we use, we're always programming in habits. I call that intelligence, right? That's the wiring intelligence. And then there's two types. There's proactive intelligence and then there's reactive intelligence. If we're just randomly moving through life, a lot of reactive intelligence will get wired in there. And it's designed to protect you, right? That's not a bad thing, but it's designed to protect you. But the problem with that reactive intelligence is it blocks our best skills and our best abilities from coming out. And then we can learn how to program or wire in what I call proactive intelligence, which is essentially just think in the right ways, thinking in a way that will unlock your skills and your abilities. Okay, so those are the two intelligences. And so then I walk through these 8 mindsets, right? And I start with being a learner, so having a learning mindset, which really is just self-belief, right? It's just a belief that hey, I can go and do anything, right? I can become a great athlete, or I can become an author, or I can go get a PhD, or we start to list out what those goals and objectives are, right? But it's all built around this strong learning mindset built on self belief. And then I move into motivation and I talk about, hey, what are the core things that motivate us? There's some things that are hardwired into us that are just innate in us. And then those lead us they inspire us, they spark that fire in us, and then they lead us to do crazy things like demonstrate grit and resilience and discipline and commitment and get up at 4:30 in the morning like Kobe Bryant did throughout his whole career and train, right? And so we talk about the motivation, and then I have 2 sections on here's what grit is, Here's what resilience is. And I bring in a lot of the research for those two skills, right? And here's how we program grit and resilience. And then I move into what I call performance skills. These are things you're doing on the field, on the track, in the moment you're competing, right? And it starts with, I call it energy. In the sports psychology world, we call it emotional regulation. But I call it energy because there's more pieces to it. There's your physical energy, there's your mental energy, and there's your emotional energy. But it's an important skill to learn to dial in kind of all of those elements so that you can think efficiently and you can conserve energy and exert energy appropriately, right? Like we've all had games or competitions or races where like you get to the last part of it and you're fatigued. You're totally gassed. You have no more energy in you. A lot of that's due to you just mismanaged it. And that could be because of physical elements, but it also could be a lot of the mental elements in there. So that's the first kind of performance mindset there. And then I move into here's what confidence is. And here's how you build it, and here's how you apply it when you're on the field. And then here's what focus is. Again, here's how you build it, and here's how you apply it. And then the last skill really is decision making. It's the ability to quickly and efficiently and assertively make decisions on the field, in the game, and make them without any interference, right? So we're trying to block out all the distractions, the external interference that comes in there. So I walk readers through the neuroscience, the research, what high performance is, and then each of these mindsets and how you build and apply those so that then whatever domain you're in, you're now applying it. It could be business, it could be performing arts. The whole book is written around sport. That's kind of my field and my domain. But then you could apply it to your sport. And so that's those are the 8 mindsets and the idea behind here's what we do to wire in proactive intelligence to help you unlock and achieve, really, quite honestly, whatever it is you want to achieve, right?
So that's a lot. And of course, to master all of those takes time and a lot of effort and a lot of awareness. And if you put it all in one neat book, it is awesome and amazing for the people that are going to consume it and apply it. But I'm just curious from your perspective, too, on maybe a broader scale. Is there one thing, two things that helps these athletes and these high performers that you're working with break through when other people seem to just continue to stay stuck?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing there is having the cognitive ability, and I know that's a fancy psychology word, but really the cognitive ability to choose and control the words and the language that you let into your mind, right? All of those skills that I walked through and talked about are built by just choosing and controlling your words, right? This in psychology we call this self-talk, right? But it's
Mhm.
that inner dialogue, those inner voices, right? But I simplify it all the way down to choosing and controlling your word and then building the thinking patterns. And if we're building the right ones, that's going to be proactive. If we're building the wrong ones, that's going to be reactive, right? So that really, when it comes down to what's the simplest skill, let's go and learn how we control our words and control our language. And then that's going to set you up for all the rest of them, right? The best athletes in the world, when they get in those big moments, that's all they're doing is just controlling their thoughts and controlling their mind, which is then allowing them to make great decisions, right?
Is there a component at all to helping athletes balance ambition with their overall well being? Because on one hand, we've got this drive for results, but on the other hand, at some point as human beings, we need that inner peace. So, how do you strike that balance?
Yeah. So I talk about that a lot in chapter, call it 4, the motivation chapter, because we talk about what really motivates us. And there are some motivators that push us towards trophies and rewards and outcomes and winning, but those are usually fleeting and short lived. And there's other motivators that are more enduring and more long lasting that will push you further down the path. And so and as they push you further down the path, they actually are more fulfilling, right? So a couple of these are you developing positive relationships with people around you. That could be your teammates, that could be coaching staff, it could also be in your own individual life, right? One of them is do you have meaning and purpose, right? Are you developing and finding more meaning and purpose? What's your why? And so we talk about that. And then there's other ones, achievement, mastery. There's other elements that really drive us and really motivate us. And so we walk through all of that and share, here are the best ones. And what's great about them is that they'll push you further down the path towards, call it whatever your definition of success is. They'll push you further down the path, but they also do it in a very healthy, balanced manner that sort of enhances that well-being side too.
Yeah, that is really powerful stuff. I love that. Also interested in whether or not you're in the former athlete category. You're right there next to me. We've been thrown in that bin. Are you applying these in your own personal life, even though you are no longer an athlete? And then also, as a follow up to that, is there one of these components or mindsets that's really taken you the longest to learn?
I think as a student of the field, I call myself a researcher or a scientist. I think I'm always applying and I'm always studying. And I usually use myself as the first test subject, right? If this is a laboratory and I'm one of the rats, I'll always try to like, okay, let's go test this in my world and see the results of the application here. And so, yeah, always testing it, always applying it. And I'm like you, I'm in the has been category, right? But I'm also doing new things, right? So I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm performing in my own domain here as a mental performance coach, right? I'm also performing, right? So I got to be sharpening my skills and developing my abilities even as a coach. And so I'm applying a lot of the mental skills to help me develop those skills and abilities. But I'm also an entrepreneur, right? I shared with you before we jumped on the call a project I'm working on to help young developing athletes get access to world-class mental strength training through technology. And so I'm learning a lot about what it means to be a bootstrapped entrepreneur. There's a whole lot of distraction and interference that comes in, potentially anxiety and stress that come in as you're trying to build something like that. And so I do apply regularly. And then you asked the question about what's the hardest one to apply. And I think this is for me, but I think generally across the board. And I'll share a cool story. Heard a story. I'm not 100% sure if this is a true story or a false story, but it sounds amazing. So, like for
Just
the
go with
point
true.
of the story, yeah, for the point of this, we'll tell the story. But Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, obviously great businessmen in terms of creating a ton of wealth and success with their ventures there. They're at a dinner, and the question gets proposed. And there were other business leaders there too, and they went around the room and they said, "Hey, in one word, what would you describe as like the skill or the thing that helped you be successful?" And went around the room, and Warren Buffett and Bill Gates both said the same word, and that was focus, the skill of focus. And so I think all of us are developing that skill of how do we direct our attention to relevant information that helps us grow and learn and achieve and succeed. And even if the definition of achieving and succeeding is finding that inner peace, just developing a flourishing life, yeah, then how do we focus and direct our attention onto the things that help us get there? We live in a, honestly, we live in an attention economy, right? There are so many devices out there and companies out there just like clawing and scratching to get our attention. And some of them are wildly good at it, like dangerously good at it. You start to get onto the iPhones and the social media, and like they definitely are applying some real psychology and some real neuroscience to just grab our attention, right? But that's the battle. That's the skill is how do we then get really good at controlling that attention and directing that attention so we can focus on the good things, focus on what it is we want to achieve or what do we want to accomplish, or even just be present. I'm a dad. I have 5 kids, so we have half an army in our house. And I have to be pretty intentional about, hey, let's just be present with our kids and have experiences and do fun things. And so that's probably the one I'm working on the most is where am I directing my attention and am I doing that in a meaningful and positive way there?
That's a great answer because you're right. It has never been harder to focus with everything that's coming at us. And the number of decisions, you probably have that number. I think it's somewhere like 35,000 a day that we're faced with. It's never been harder to make good decisions under that type of pressure and everything that's coming at us. That's why your work is so important. So I love all that you're doing on so many different levels. And I'll end with this question. And this has been awesome. So thanks again for hopping on. Do you have a bigger, you mentioned the word why, is there, call it purpose or mission? Do you have kind of broad level goal for yourself personally and your businesses to affect change going forward for athletes and non-athletes alike?
Yeah, I do. And it's deep. It's in there. And it really starts with that first story I shared. with my own sport experience, right? I saw firsthand the transformation that I went through just by applying these skills. It helped me in a lot of ways, right? And then I'll add this piece into it. So if we look at society today and we look at the psychology continuum, on one hand, you have flourishing, thriving people that are doing great. And then on this side, we all the way on the clinically mental ill, mental health, like we have people that are really hurting and really struggling. And then you got a lot of people in between. I'm a big advocate and a big proponent of let's teach people the skills and the abilities to help them, one, move from, if they are in this spot, like move a little bit up the continuum, but help them move from the middle all the way to this side, right? How do we help everybody learn the cognitive abilities to develop these just fulfilling, thriving lives, right? So if that's the psychology world, so you got my personal experience, the psychology world, and then adding to this continuum, like mental health. We're in like pandemic levels in terms of mental health. Like there are a lot of needs out there. It seems like it's getting worse and worse, and especially with our young people. There's a good book called Anxious Generation, written by Jonathan Haidt. He's a positive psychologist, but he describes this paradox, and it was about the intersection of when we gave kids an iPhone and gave them social media, or the rise of social media, the intersection of those two things, and then this constant correlating rise in mental health. And so I'm watching that, you're watching that, I have kids, and I'm just seeing our younger population, and I'm thinking, man, how do we help these kids? How do we help us? How do we help the older us as well? But you have this whole developing younger generation that's growing up, quite honestly, in a world we've never seen. We've never seen a world where like the phone is an appendage, right? It's just attached to every kid, right? And it honestly, it's wiring their brains in a different way. I grew up where my parents were like, get out of the house, go get lost in the woods. I don't want to see you till dark. And if you get hungry, fine, drink out of the hose, go drink out of the river, deal with it.
Yeah.
But kids are growing up in it's a different environment. And I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad environment, but it's different, right? And so we also got to give them tools and skills to help them thrive in this environment. And so really my why and my mission is, man, how do we help as many of these young developing, call them kids, developing athletes, learn how to have real mental strength, and develop so they know exactly what to do when adversity hits. They know exactly how to bounce back from that. They see a challenge and they charge right at it with like enthusiasm and excitement, instead of running away because they don't want to be embarrassed or judged, or fear any kind of failure. So that's my why. And it starts with my own experience, the current trends that we're seeing, and then just this deep rooted passion to want to help people develop real mental strength.
I'm right in the fight with you, my man. I love it.
Yeah,
That's a
let's
great
go.
answer. So the book is Wiring Intelligence. Are we in the pre-order stage or we're not there yet?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, I'll
we are
tell
in the
people
pre-order stage.
where they can pre-order it.
Motivate.com. So it's a bad license plate, right? So MOTYV8, the number 8.com. And then you scroll down a little bit. There's a section there that says pre-order the book.
I can't wait to read it, and I know it's going to affect so many lives going forward, not just the lives of us has-beens, but the lives of these young athletes as well. Dr. Bobby Lowe, thanks so much for joining the show. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. This was fun.